Hello again, seventh graders. Today we're going to be talking about Spain building an empire, and this is all going to happen after Columbus's initial voyage west across the Atlantic that occurred for the first time in 1492. We're going to look at the results of Columbus's voyage, which would end up in a large number of Spanish and other explorers following. Don't want to say in his footsteps because he's traveling across the ocean, but basically following in his path across the ocean to further explore the Americas. So this section is titled "Spain Builds an Empire," Chapter 3, Section 2. And we've got on the top of our vocabulary list today, we have 3 of the 9 terms that will appear in this particular section. 3 of the 9. The entire study deck of words can be found on your Quizlet page. And as always, I post them on Quizlet. I also post your Quizlet decks on your Google Classroom feed. So let's take a look at 3 of the terms that appear in today's mini lecture. The first word is conquistador, which is the Spanish word for conqueror. The second word is plantation, which is a large estate farmed by many workers. We are going to spend a lot of time this year talking about plantations in North America and in the United States up to the end of the Civil War. Large estates farmed by many workers. We're going to key in as the year goes on about what life would have been like on an American plantation for slaves. So plantation, important word, large estate farmed by many workers. And finally, encomienda is a land grant given by the Spanish government, which basically allowed Spanish explorers and settlers to demand taxes and labor from Native Americans that they came into contact with. So 3 of the 9 words there, conquistador, plantation, and encomienda. The 9 total words that appear in this deck, again, can be found on your Quizlet deck. And please make sure you should be studying your Quizlet decks 5 to 10 minutes each night for each deck that you've been assigned for that week. Let's take a look first at our reading of this section, Chapter 3, Section 2, Spain Builds an Empire. Okay, as I pointed out at the top of the screencast, after Columbus, a new wave of Spanish explorers called conquistadors came to the Americas to secure riches and establish Spanish colonies. 2 of these conquistadors, Hernando Cortez and Francisco Pizarro, conquered the Aztecs and the Incas. We studied the Aztecs earlier in the marking period. We also talked about the Incas. These were 2 of the early groups that had settled in Central and South America. Not only did Cortez have superior weapons, he joined forces with the Aztecs' enemies. He also took advantage of the Aztecs' belief that the Europeans were gods and of the Aztecs' fear of horses. Remember when we talked about the Anasazis earlier in the year, we said that the Anasazis, when they first saw those conquistadors arriving in the American Southwest with their horses, imagine the fear of seeing these men on animals that they had never seen before, and these men wearing clothing, in this instance, armor, suits of metal that they had never seen before either. Same applied with the Aztecs. The Aztecs had a fear of horses as well. And likewise, Francisco Pizarro, easily overwhelmed the Incas with his advanced weapons. This is an important theme. Remember that these Spanish explorers, when they came overseas and came into contact with the Native Americans, one of the advantages that the Spanish had, was even though they were outnumbered by many, many more Native American groups, they certainly had better firepower than the Aztecs and the Incas. And the fact that they had weapons, advanced weapons, guns, was a huge advantage. Soon, Spanish territory spanned from what is now California to Florida, and the Spanish king established the law of the Indies to organize life in the new empire. So you've got the king across the Atlantic Ocean in Spain organizing what life is going to be like in the new empire. The law called for 3 types of settlements: pueblos for farming and trade, presidios for military bases, and missions for converting Native Americans to Christianity. Again, pueblos for farming and trade, presidios for military bases, and missions for converting Native Americans to Christianity. All three of those, by the way, are vocab terms as well: pueblo, mission, and presidio. A strict set of social classes emerged in the colonies. Colonists were divided into peninsulares, those people who were born in Spain and had the highest jobs; Creoles, who were born to Spanish parents and were often educated and wealthy; mestizos, who were of mixed background and served as skilled workers; and Native Americans, who were often treated and considered as slaves. Now, that being said, Native Americans were the main source of labor, where landowners had plantations or encomiendas to be farmed or mines to be excavated. The Native Americans were used as the main source of labor. Millions of these Native Americans died from overwork, starvation, and disease. We'll talk about that in a moment when we look at the diagram. And eventually, Africans were imported as slaves as well. Slavery would remain a key to the economy of the Americas for 3 centuries. Let's take a look at our questions that appear at the bottom. Answer the following questions. We're going to talk about these in class today after this mini lecture, or actually right now during this mini lecture. First question is going to be based on the reading that we just did. And again, when you're asked a question following the reading, the very first place you should look to attempt to obtain an answer to the question would be where? In the reading. So why did Spanish conquistadors come to the Americas? I think you can find the answer in the very first paragraph of this reading, of which you will have a hard copy here in the classroom, and our remote learners will have this attached to their Google Classroom page. Take a look at that for a moment and determine, highlight, underline, and point out on your worksheet why Spanish conquistadors came to the Americas. The second question in our mini lecture today addresses the graph that appears on the right-hand side of our worksheet. The graph question asks, describe what happened to the Native American population of central Mexico between the years 1520 and 1600. Now, looking at the graph, okay, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this right now. Looking at the graph, I'm going to try to move now. I'm going to move this over to the other side if I can. Let's see if I can pause the video and move that. That's a little better. So if you look at the graph, the title of the graph is Native American Population of Central Mexico. All of our graphs will have titles, just like all of our maps typically will have titles. And the Native American population of Central Mexico, and on the axis to the left here, you've got millions of people estimated, and it goes from 0 million up to 26 million. And then on the bottom axis, moving left to right, it goes in increments of 20 years, starting at 1500 out to 1620. The question is asking you, what is happening to the population of the Native Americans between the years 1520 and 1560? And if you look at the graph, the year 1520 is right about here. What's happening to the population between 1500 and 1620? I think it's pretty easy to see the population is what? It's dwindling. I'd like you to think for a couple of moments based on our reading and our knowledge of the things we've talked about in class on this topic.